You know, back in the early 1970s, we Americans had this unshakable faith in technology. If it was big, shiny, made noise, and burned fuel like a small planet, we believed it was invincible. Enter the B-52 Stratofortress. To us, it wasn't just a bomber. It was a flying monument to American engineering. 8 jet engines, wings so wide they could cast shade on Kansas, and a bomb load that could rearrange geography. We called it the Flying Fortress. And just to be clear, the idea was that nothing on Earth could touch it. Until, of course, Hanoi happened. It was December 1972. The war in Vietnam had dragged on way too long. Back home, people were tired protests, bad press, and that growing sense of, why are we still here? President Nixon needed a strong move, so the brass at the Pentagon said, "Sir, let's bring in the B-52s. Let's show them who's boss." The idea was simple. Drop so many bombs on Hanoi and Haiphong that North Vietnam would finally say, okay, we'll sign whatever you want. They called it Operation Linebacker II. 12 days of shock and awe, before shock and awe was even a marketing term. What could possibly go wrong? The B-52 wasn't new by '72, but it was still the heavyweight champion of the skies. It could fly over 30,000 feet high, that's about 10 kilometers up. It could carry up to 30 tons of bombs. 30 tons. That's not precision strike. That's, let's see if the map still exists tomorrow. Each one cost several $1 million, and that's in 1970s money. Adjusted for inflation, you could probably buy a small country. So imagine the confidence. We thought, no way these things get touched. Vietnam doesn't even have color TV yet. But here's the thing about war: confidence and reality don't always text each other. Now, if you were sitting in Hanoi at that time, you'd been bombed before. For years, American planes had hit bridges, factories, power plants, you name it. But the city didn't break. Every time a bridge fell, someone was out there the next morning fixing it. Every time a neighborhood got hit, people dug shelters, swept the streets, and carried on. And while we thought the North Vietnamese were hiding in caves, they were actually studying us. They watched radar blips. They learned our flight patterns. They figured out that Americans were creatures of habit. We liked to fly the same routes at the same heights at the same times, very polite of us. They didn't have fancy stealth fighters. They had Soviet-made SAM-2 missiles, old radars, and this is key, a terrifying amount of patience. December 18, 1972. We launched over 180 B-52s, supported by hundreds of fighter jets. It was the biggest bombing raid since World War II. Somewhere over Hanoi, a young radar operator probably looked up and thought, well, here they come again. But this time the Vietnamese were ready. When those massive bombers appeared on radar, they didn't panic. They turned on searchlights, locked on with radar, and fired volleys of SAM-2 missiles, big white streaks tearing into the night sky. And then, to everyone's shock, a B-52 went down. No way, right. Those things were supposed to be untouchable, but the radio chatter back at the Guam base was real. We've lost one. Confirmed crash. The room went silent. One guy probably spilled his coffee. Another whispered, "That can't be right." Except it was. If this were a movie, you'd think we learned our lesson. But in true American fashion, we doubled down. For the next 11 nights, the bombing continued. Every night, waves of B-52s flew over Hanoi, same altitude, same routes, like a really destructive bus schedule. And every night, more of them didn't come back. The North Vietnamese called it Dien Bien Phu, Trinh Quang, the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in the sky. To us, it was just pure chaos. By the end of the campaign, we'd lost 34 B-52s and about 15 other aircraft. That's not just a bad week, that's catastrophic for the U.S. Air Force. Each plane had a 6-man crew. Many were captured. Some didn't make it home. And for the first time, the phrase "Flying Fortress" sounded ironic. After the dust settled, the Air Force launched a full investigation. You can imagine the mood, lots of pointing at maps and saying, "Whose idea was this?" Turns out several big mistakes. One, predictability. We used the same flight paths and altitudes night after night. That made us the military equivalent of a rerun on TV. The Vietnamese basically set their watches by us. Too overconfidence in technology. We thought our radar jamming would make us invisible. Spoiler, it didn't. Their engineers simply recalibrated frequencies and surprise our invisible planes lit up like Christmas trees. 3. Underestimating human grit. We assumed they'll run out of missiles. They didn't. They repaired and reused dud warheads, even hand-tuning circuits by flashlight. That's the kind of DIY spirit you don't see in manuals. 4. The weather. Yeah, we didn't account for cloud cover smoke and signal reflection. Apparently, even billion-dollar bombers can't outsmart the atmosphere. When all was said and done, our shiny strategy had turned into a lesson in humility. Imagine being one of those B-52 crews. 6 guys crammed in a flying tank 10 kilometers above the ground watching radar screens while hearing missile launch alarms blaring every minute. The crew couldn't see the missiles, but they could feel them. Each SAM-2 was about the size of a telephone pole and exploded close enough to shake the aircraft. Some pilots reported their planes lit up like Christmas. Others said the sky looked like 4th of July gone wrong. And the Vietnamese gunners. They weren't exactly relaxed either. Each launch required coordination, timing, and nerves of steel. Miss too early, the missile runs out of fuel. Too late, the bomber's gone. So when they hit one, it wasn't luck. It was math, grit, and caffeine. By day 12, both sides were exhausted. Crews were sleep-deprived, radar operators were half-blind, and even generals started asking the forbidden question, why are we still doing this? On December 30, 1972, President Nixon called off the bombing. Officially, the goal was achieved. Unofficially, the losses were just too high. A few weeks later, the U.S. signed the Paris Peace Accords. The war, at least for us, was winding down. The Pentagon never liked to call Linebacker II a failure, but behind closed doors, generals admitted we underestimated them. And the American public, they'd seen enough. The idea of the unbeatable superpower had just taken a direct hit over Hanoi. Years later, some of the pilots who flew those missions visited Vietnam. They met the people who once aimed missiles at them. They shared coffee stories, even jokes. One veteran said, "Back then we called them the enemy. Now I just call them people who refuse to give up." There's something humbling about that. Technology can win battles, but it can't measure determination. And the people of Hanoi, they had that in industrial quantities. So why did the B-52s fall? Not because they were bad machines, but because they flew into a place where the will to fight was stronger than the fear of losing. After Operation Linebacker II, an odd silence settled over U.S. air bases, quiet, uneasy, almost embarrassed. Pilots walked around in a daze. Engineers scratched their heads. Generals were busy thinking of how to explain this to Congress. We used to believe no nation on earth can shoot down a B-52. Then Hanoi calmly replied, "Really? Here, take these pieces back." Honestly, when the wreckage of a B-52 was displayed right in the heart of Hanoi, it was like a declaration written in steel. We didn't just survive, we won. Across the ocean, American newspapers started asking questions. Headlines read, "B-52s still invincible, the cost of pride in the skies, who lost the bombers." And just like that, a new military keyword was born: overconfidence. The U.S. Air Force spent billions of dollars to learn 3 very basic lessons they could have learned for free, if only someone had listened. Lesson 1. Don't be predictable. We flew at the same routes, same time, same altitude for 12 nights straight. If Uber had existed back then, Vietnamese radar operators could have just opened the app and seen, "Your B-52 will arrive in 7 minutes. Prepare SAM-2. Lesson 2. Every system has limits. Jamming enemy radar. Great until the enemy changes the frequency. Flying higher to avoid anti-aircraft guns. Smart until the missiles fly higher too. Even American technology couldn't stand against Vietnamese creativity. Lesson 3. No technology can defeat human resilience. Vietnamese crews worked under bombs inside tunnels, fixing radar by hand, calculating angles with rulers, while we had supercomputers. We had machines. They had willpower. And guess who won? After the campaign debates erupted inside the U.S. military. Some generals said if we had adjusted our tactics sooner, things would have turned out differently. Maybe they were right. But the truth was much simpler. We underestimated them. Reports showed that Vietnamese radar systems never stopped working for all 12 nights. When one station was bombed, they built another. When equipment broke, Vietnamese engineers took apart old Soviet radar parts and soldered them back together by hand. No spare parts. They used copper wire, condensed milk cans, and a little bit of miracle. We called it improvisation. They simply called it nothing is impossible. Over 20 years later, many former B-52 pilots returned to Vietnam. One of them, John, who had been shot down and held in Hoa Lo prison, said, "I remember when the plane was hit. All I could think was, no way, this is a B-52. And then the ground just started coming closer and closer." When he returned to Hanoi, a Vietnamese veteran shook his hand and said, "We were once on opposite sides, but now we share the same peaceful sky." John smiled and replied, "Yeah, but that sky used to be full of my airplanes falling from it." That moment, funny, painful, and heartwarming all at once. Because no matter how cruel war is, people still find a way to forgive and to respect each other. Today in Hanoi, there's the B-52 Victory Museum, where the wreckage of bombers lies quietly under the sun. American tourists visit, take photos, and most of them share the same reaction. Wow. I used to think these things were unbeatable. One middle-aged American visitor told a Vietnamese guide, "It's weird. I feel proud and humbled at the same time, because sometimes the real victory isn't about who wins, but about what both sides learn." Imagine if Google Maps had existed in 1972. Pilots would have received a warning like, "Alert, you're about to enter a high missile density zone. Would you like to reroute?" And maybe Operation Linebacker II would have lasted just 2 days, or if social media had been around. B-52 Challenge. Who dares to fly over Hanoi and not get shot down? TikTok Sam Dance. Learn how to aim at a B-52 through dance moves. Just kidding. But that's the American way. We laugh at our own mistakes, and that's how we really learn something. After 1972, the U.S. Air Force began a massive tactical overhaul. They studied thousands of pages of radar data from Hanoi and developed new doctrines for electronic warfare flight altitudes and strike formations. Many lessons from Dien Bien Phu in the air were later applied in the 1991 Gulf War. And this time, it was a whole different story. Changing flight altitudes, flexible tactics, decoy radars, and electronic spoofing. You could say the B-52s that fell in Hanoi opened the eyes of the entire U.S. Air Force. A painful fall, but a necessary one. 50 years have passed. Hanoi is peaceful now. Coffee still smells rich, the streets are still crowded, and up in the sky, no jet engines roaring anymore. Many Americans visit Vietnam as tourists today, often unaware that the cafe they're sitting in was once a spot where a SAM-2 radar operated. History never disappears, it just stays quiet, waiting for us to learn something from it. Not because Hanoi had stronger weapons, not because America was incompetent, but because we forgot the simplest truth. No technology can defeat a people who refuse to surrender. The B-52s fell because of arrogance, because we forgot that the human heart can be stronger than any jet engine. Today, Americans and Vietnamese make films together, do business together, laugh together. No one uses the word enemy anymore, just people who lived through history and learned that every victory has its price. If you asked me as an American, how do you feel about the B-52s being shot down over Hanoi, I would smile and say, I feel grateful, because it taught us that true strength isn't in the sky, it's in the hearts of the people on the ground.